It's showtime.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
You know, the right to bear arms is because that's the last form of defense against tyranny.
Washington is fundamentally corrupt. There are more words in the IRS code than there are in the Bible.
Welcome to Blunt Force Truth. My name is Rusty Humphreys. I'm one of the behind-the-scene guys here at Blunt Force Truth. Chuck Woolery and Mark Young aren't going to be here live today. We're going to give you some of the best clips, and I know it's really hard to find some of the best clips, but we're going to give you some of the best clips, some of our favorite clips from 2018. Now, before we jump in, I'd like to thank everybody for their support over the past year. Chuck and Mark are so thrilled, and your support is driving them to have a bigger and better Blunt Force Truth in 2019. So thank you for a great 2018. We are going to have a great 2019, and let's get started with the year-end show 2018 of Blunt Force Truth. Our first clip of 2018, Best of Blunt Force Truth. Trevor Loudon is the guest, talking about socialist takeover and what we're seeing throughout the world, and the dark truth about progressivism. Now, if you've listened to Blunt Force Truth much, you know Chuck Woolery is a big guardian against progressivism. Trevor talks about the left's love for euphemisms that cover up their true agenda, the uninformed supporters of communist and socialist movements that don't realize that communism and socialism has never succeeded anywhere in the world. So let's get to it. Trevor Loudon with Mark Young and Chuck Woolery with Blunt Force Truth.
Well, we're back. Trevor, you're very well versed in all of this stuff. The only problem with conversations like this for Americans, I think, for the average American, is it sounds so fantastic that it sounds like it's just something, it's almost like a Star Wars thing. It can't be real. And yet we're watching this unfold every day, not just in America, but around the world. This kind of socialist takeover. I mean, we're really not constitutional. We're in a post-constitutional era right now and have been for some time. Europe is just totally socialist. I mean, and continuing to go farther and farther to the left all the time. You look at the Democrat Party today, they're all progressives. Most people have no idea what progressive means, where it came from, what the implications are. It is progressivism is totally anti-American, anti-constitutional, anti-capitalist. It is everything we would not want to, or anything we'd want to take away our freedom and our freedoms and our liberty. And yet, I just don't think people understand. When these people stand up and say they're progressive, they think they're, part of an insurance company.
Yes, they're looking to make progress.
Well, the left is always about euphemisms, isn't it? They were liberals, but that became a bad word, so they changed it to progressives. The word progressive came out of the communist movement, came out of the Communist Party.
And Hegel, Marx, and Lenin, and then it went on to fascism. It infected everything, and it came out of Germany, which is interesting too. Political correctness is all part of that.
Yeah, well, we see people say, "Well, there's no communism in America today." Well, what is Black Lives Matter? What is they're complete communist movement controlled by the pro-Chinese Freedom Road Socialist Organization. The people tearing down Confederate statues in Louisiana and North Carolina are all members of the Workers' World Party, which is a group that supports North Korea and Iran and Russia, Putin's Russia. Then you have the massive anti-Trump protest movement. You had 1 million women marching in Washington, led by the Communist Party USA and the Freedom Road Socialist Organization.
And they were right up front about that, America. Right?
Yeah, they have it on their masthead. They have it on their website. But the media never comments on it. The media never says anything.
But most of the women that were marching didn't even know why they were there.
Exactly. And, 2,000 Bolsheviks took over Russia. 2,000 communists took over Russia. But they had thousands of people marching under their banner who had no idea what they were doing. And I would say 98% of the women in those women's march had no idea they were being led by hardcore anti-American communists.
I mean, it sounds like you're warning us here of something, Trevor, if I'm understanding here. It sounds like you are warning our audience that it is possible for a small group of communist socialists in this country to take over 320 million people.
Look, absolutely. Look, if Hillary Clinton had been elected and legalized, between 12 and 40 million illegals, she would have had a one-party monopoly on this country from that point. That's not weird conspiracy theory. That is just simple math.
Well, no wonder they're so mad.
And they were like a bunch of kids on election night. They were like a bunch of kids who thought they're going to get the biggest bike you've ever seen for Christmas, and they got a pair of socks. And they're bitter. They had a one-party state in their grasp. They thought they were going to get power forever and be able to push their agenda down everybody's throats. They were going to turn the whole of America into San Francisco. And it got taken away from them by these crazy people out in the Midwest who still believe in the Constitution and American exceptionalism.
Rednecks with our guns and our Bible.
These cavemen, these horrible people that they thought they had beaten. And now the tables were turned. That's why they're so bitter.
So, Trevor, let me ask you a question.
They are fighting back hard.
So let me ask you a question. Socialism, communism, it's never worked anywhere in the history of man. Why do they keep thinking it's going to work now?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. The naive ones will tell you that it only ever failed in Russia, and that because America sabotaged it. America drove the Soviets into bankruptcy. America blockaded Cuba and drove Cuba to starvation. It's all America's fault. So if you're going to have real socialism and communism around the country, you have to get rid of America.
So it needs to be worldwide. That's the problem.
It needs to be worldwide. I had a friend who trained in Moscow in 1983. He was a New Zealand government spy inside the New Zealand Communist Party, and he was sent to Moscow to train as a communist in their big training school. And the Soviet instructors said, our system doesn't work. Socialism doesn't work. It will only work when we can abolish the wage system worldwide, and then we can have socialism.
So we have to have worldwide misery for it to work.
Yeah, then it'll be paradise. We have misery all over the world, and that will transform into paradise. But see, I'll dispute one little thing you said. You say communism has never worked. Well, you've got to understand what communism is. Communism isn't a system of redistributing wealth. Communism is a system of centralizing wealth in a very few hands. And if you look at it, judge it by those standards, communism has worked wonderfully. It's great in North Korea because who's the richest man in North Korea? It's great in Cuba. The Castro brothers are billionaires. It's great in Russia because Putin is a multi-billionaire.
Maybe we should switch sides here, Chuck.
Sorry?
I'm telling Chuck, maybe we should switch sides. We'll make a fortune.
Our next featured guest here on the Blunt Force Truth 2018 special, Joe Piscopo, who is one of my all-time favorite alumni of Saturday Night Live, is on with Mark and Chuck talking about the Oscar Awards, and Joe explains why people are so sick of being preached to during these type of shows. They talk about Hollywood celebrities losing touch with the beliefs of the American people, and Chuck and Joe are going to talk about experiences that explain how Hollywood's connection includes producers and directors and others that are off the camera, and why they've gone the way they have. It's Blunt Force Truth with Chuck Woolery and Mark Young with Joe Piscopo.
All right, so I want to lead off with the first question to both you guys. We just wrapped up the fabulous Oscars with about a 20% reduction in viewership since last year. I want to get some opinion from both you guys. And Joe, I wanted to go to you and ask you about what you thought about Jimmy Kimmel's job. And Chuck, what you think about the awards speeches.
Okay, go ahead,
You know
Joe.
what?
You go first.
Yeah, Mark. Because I always try to stay positive. When I'm talking about it, and we were on Neil Cavuto's show on Fox this weekend, and your tendency is to go after them. And I said on Fox this weekend, as I will say here, I thought Jimmy had it, and you got to love Jimmy's talent, and he had the ability to bring the country together and not to be that divisive. And I thought he did a good job in that regard. And I was talking about it on the radio the last couple of days, that he didn't go for the juggler. He set the right tone. I thought Jimmy Kimmel did. There was comedy there. But then you always get the folks that always feel they have to preach to you, and therein lies the problem. It wasn't so much that Jimmy hosted it, or maybe it was because the films, no one could really identify with the films this year because they weren't like mega hits. But we are so tired of being lectured to. Oh my gosh, we had 8 years of that. You're racist. You're bigoted. You're wrong. You're doing and then when you have somebody making $30 million a year or $10 million a movie, and with due respect, by the way, great talent, we're just tired of being lectured. So I think it's starting. This is where I'll leave you, and then I'll hand it off to Chuck. Is that I think that the elitists, whether they're politicians, whether they're athletes or they're actors, they have lost complete touch with the true heart of America.
Well, I agree with that. I think you're absolutely right. The other thing is, I spent 45 years in Los Angeles. I had a great career. I did 6 hit shows. I was very fortunate. All very different. I mean, starting from Wheel of Fortune and ending up with Lingo, and Love Connection and Scrabble and Dating Game and Greed and everything in between.
And you were a country singer. You came there as a country singer, which I love, Chuck.
I did, actually. I was, Roger Miller once described my musical career as riding the crest of an undertow.
Great.
And he was right. But anyway, the whole thing is that you and I both, you're in New York, New Jersey, they're both very left-leaning. Our business is really left-leaning. It's just ridiculous not to say so. It's immersed in the left. It hasn't always been that way, but ever since I've been involved in it, it has been. And so I just, I kept my mouth shut for the entire time I was in L.A. I had lots of friends on the left, people I really loved. I really liked them. We had great times together. And I think that's one of the things that people miss when they watch Hollywood. They think, well, you got to hate these people because they don't agree with you. And that's not necessarily true. I think you have to appreciate their talent. You have to understand that. You also have to understand that they're really not up to date with what's going on. A movement is started, and it's political, and it kind of comes from the production end of it. The people who produce movies, who make movies and everything else, so they establish the precedents by which actors and actresses follow. So the pool is kind of polluted at the top, and if you don't go along with it, then they just drop you. It's like, well, I'd rather not work with him. So that happens. But when you look at the Oscars and things, it seems to me, and Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you may remember this, even though I'm older than you are. It seems like this whole
he just has a better memory. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe so. It seems like this whole political arena in the Oscars, to my recollection, started with Marlon Brando. Do you remember when Marlon Brando wouldn't come on?
Clearly. Yep. And he handed it off to a Native American to accept. Right. And then George C. Scott, and around that same era, George C. Scott didn't show up. He just didn't feel, and then Woody Allen wouldn't show up. So but you know what? If I could jump in there, Chuck, is that the beauty of what? And again, I'm going to date myself, and if you're younger listening, please, you got to check Google Bob Hope and what he did at the Academy Awards. Johnny Carson hosting the Academy Awards. Billy Crystal hosting the Academy Awards. There was really no hate or vitriol. It was just, let's poke fun at ourselves and let's have fun on it. And how it got to where it is today, I'm not quite sure, guys.
Well, I tell you, I think that you're talking about self-deprecation, which people love. When you can make fun of yourself and fun of what you do and things like, and you're seriously successful, and yet at the same time you show that vulnerability. People really love that. They enjoy it.
Yeah,
man. That's what Bob Hope's humor was like, though. Now, Brando, didn't he send Elizabeth Warren in to pick that Oscar up?
No, it wasn't really.
Great. It was. That's right. It was Pocahontas. I forgot about that. Of course.
As we continue our 2018 Best of Blunt Force Truth, Dave Rubin is here. He joins Chuck and Mark to talk about his departure from the Democratic Party over to the Republican Party. And Dave explains how once you see the flaws in the left's agenda, their whole agenda crumbles. He also talks about how you must be brave enough to share your ideas, that listening to others' beliefs or thoughts is how we're supposed to behave. Dave explains that the left has gone so far and are creating lies that conservatives are so bad and coming for their rights that it's got to be explained and looked into. Dave Rubin joined Chuck Woolery and Mark Young here on the Best of Blunt Force Truth 2018.
Yeah. So, Dave, when you went through your conversion, I don't know, did the clouds open up at some point, or?
Well, it sucks at first because, as I said earlier, it's sort of like a house of cards. So once you see one of the little problems of leftism, the rest of it crumbles very quickly. And like anything else, if you're reevaluating the way you think about everything, it's going to change a lot of things very quickly. So your friends, in many cases, or supposed friends, will turn on you very quickly. You know, if you say anything, so you could say, all right, well, I'm for lower taxes. I've realized that the government is not the best way to help poor people, for example. They'll tell you you're racist. And then you'll say, wait a minute. I've been friends with you for 20 years. Have you ever heard me say anything racist? And they'll say no. And then they'll say, but you call me racist. Well, but you don't want to help people. You're a racist. I mean, so the conversion, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. There's a wound, there's a gaping wound there. But what you realize very quickly is, you just have the balls to do that. Just make the first move. Say, this is who I am. This is what I think. You will find other people quickly. And yes, I lost family. I didn't lose family.
That was my question. That's what I wanted to ask you. When you finally took the blue pill, what happened with your friends and your relationships?
Yeah, I think you mean the red pill.
Or the red pill. Sorry. Well, the blue pill's fun sometimes too. But
yeah. That's a different pill. I lost friends without question. Family members that I was fighting with, although in at least for me in the family context, my family was always arguing about politics, so we were able to get over it. But as I said, for whatever I lost, I gained back 100 times over. And I think that's why my message and the things that I talk about have resonated with people, because I think people basically see me as a decent guy I'm really not trying to bludgeon anyone over the head with my ideas. I want people to hear ideas. A couple weeks ago, we looked at like the last 10 guests I had. I had Kelly Carlin, who happens to be George Carlin's daughter. She's a good friend of mine, and she's a big lefty. That very week, I had David Frum on, who's a never Trump conservative. The week before, I had Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA, who's a huge Trump guy who I'm going to speak at Berkeley with in a couple days. I mean, I really like getting into the ideas and hearing what people think. And, that's what we're supposed to be doing. And if you just show that you're brave enough to say, this is what I think, and I will be respectful of your ideas, but I don't have to bow to them. You will find allies all over the place, and that's why guys like you are happy to talk to a guy like me. Even though I'm happy to get into what our political differences may be, but they really don't matter if we'll all basically defend freedom and liberty. That's it.
What do you think our political differences are?
So I would say one, I describe myself as begrudgingly pro-choice. So for me, I think at 20 weeks, I think you no longer should have the option of an abortion. But until then, I do believe it should be the woman's right. Now, I've had great debates with Ben Shapiro on my show, who's obviously pro-life.
But this is more of a spiritual thing than it is a social thing. It really is. I think the conservative Christians come at that from a biblical point of view. And sometimes people don't agree with us on that, and so we have a parting of the ways. But that's again a spiritual thing.
Well, and I agree with that. Let me look at the way you just framed that. That's a beautiful thing. We can, whether we agree or not, the purpose of living in a pluralistic society. We live in a country with about 400 million people. the fact that we can agree to disagree, and that sometimes, your side will be winning a little more than my side or anything like that, that's what it's all about. But once we keep giving power to the government, let's look at it this way. Right now there's a big meme out there on the left and in mainstream that the right controls everything because they control the Congress and the Senate and the presidency and blah, blah.
Which is nonsense because we don't have a supermajority.
Well, and also, right. I mean, you can look at how inept McConnell is. I mean, we can't even get Richard Grenell, who's a great human being. We don't even have an ambassador to Germany right now because the Congress is so frozen. But what I would say is, look, if the right, these evil conservatives control everything right now, is the government coming for anybody right now? Are we knocking down?
Wait, you just hit a very important thing when you said the right, these evil conservatives. It's not true.
No, I know, but that's my point.
But it's absolutely not true. The right aren't evil conservatives. The right aren't even conservatives. The right are Republicans. They hate conservatives.
Now, I've used your line before, by the way.
What's that?
I've used Dave's line when somebody would say, the Republicans are controlling everything, and I'll ask them, okay, but if they're Nazis and they control everything, have you seen anybody marching down the street to come and get you?
But that's, and you really need to it sounds ridiculous, right? But at some level, you really need to understand it because the left has gone so bananas that let's just pretend for a moment that there was a real leftist president and the left controlled the Senate and the Congress, and we already know they control media and Hollywood and everything else. How do you think it would be going for minority voices that lean a little right now? How would it be going? I mean, if you think it's going bad on college campuses now, do you know how much worse it will be? Trump, I've got some issues with Trump. The guy's not putting journalists in jail. Obama, by the way, put more journalists in jail than any president in U.S. history.
He spied on what's his name from Fox. Was it Rosen? Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, James Rosen.
Yeah.
But so that's my point, is that if they've created such a situation where the hysteria has been ramped up to the point where when the real bad guys come, when socialism or communism or fascism comes, people won't be able to see it because they've created this fake monster now. And that's why I've tried to treat Trump like every other politician, and he sometimes does good things and sometimes does bad things. But if you're screaming that he's Hitler all the time, even though he hasn't done, which is so dismissive for a million reasons, and so wrong for a million reasons, that when the real bad guys come, our ability to gauge right and wrong will not work.
No, but that's very interesting.
It's very interesting. Let me say this first, Mark. It's very interesting because I did live in Los Angeles 45 years, and so I can use that as kind of a base point with you, Dave. And I know this is absolutely true. Being a conservative, I had an awful lot of liberal friends who didn't like me because I was a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
I never disliked any of them because they were liberal, ever.
Yeah, well, there's
many of them I liked. I like it, and I still like them today. I mean, I like who they are. I like them as people. I don't agree with them politically, but I don't hate them because they're politically incorrect as far as I'm concerned.
Dennis Prager has a great line on this, which I quote all the time, and I think it just sums it up perfectly. He says that the right thinks that the left is wrong. The left thinks that the right is evil.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
And I think that fundamentally, I understand that now as someone that has been on both sides of this. I don't think that my intellectual opponents, even the people on the left that I can talk about all day long, yes, do I think there are some people that are inherently bad actors and truly have bad motives? Yes. But I don't think the average person that is on the left is evil. I think they're misguided. I think they're misinformed. And I think they're wrong. But the way they look at not only you guys, but someone like me, is they believe that you are evil, that you are truly either racist or bigoted or whatever. And that is, to get over that, that's the hurdle that I think the modern right or conservatism or whatever has to get over. The idea, no, we're not. We're actually defending your ability to tell us we're evil.
It's interesting. I'm an Islamophobe.
2018 continues. It's the best of Blunt Force Truth with Mark Young and Chuck Woolery. Patrick Howley is next. He's talking about the deep state and how it has hindered the president from doing his duties as the president. They talk about the Democratic Party acting like a religious group or a cult, and they discuss about how Democrats are threatened by those that are not conservatives but have shown support for President Trump, and how the Republican Party is much more open to everyone. Patrick Howley's the guest as the best of Blunt Force Truth with Chuck Woolery and Mark Young continue.
And by the way, think about how crazy we all sound right now.
I agree with you. It sounds like conspiracy off the tracks.
Right. Someone who is
so bizarre.
Someone who is not following these stories and someone who is getting their news from, 20 minutes of CNN every day would listen to this podcast right now and say these guys are all wearing tinfoil hats and they're in a bunker and they're insane. That's what the mainstream media would portray us as right now.
Well, here's one tactic that I know Trump and Steve Bannon used early on is they went around to the deep state and they fed false stories to, say, 4 or 5 different people. And then when that story would show up in CNN, they know who the leaker is. And they have been doing stuff like that. I mean, can you imagine if the president actually had time to govern the country instead of playing these cat and mouse games with his own administration?
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, and that's the problem. But they're not interested in that, and they're not interested in the country. They're interested in power. I have said recently, although I think this is probably true for many, many years, that the Democrat Party doesn't care about women. They don't care about black people. They don't really care about the LGBTQ community. They care about power. That's all it's about. And they just use these people as levers to gain it.
I think that's right. The Democratic Party is a very weird perversion. The Republican Party is the party that has always protected our Republican values, our small r Republican values. And the Democrats is this kind of populist perversion that is no longer populist because it's on the side of all these money people in San Francisco and these foreign agents in the Middle East. The Democratic Party is a very weird organization that I would equate more to something like Scientology or a cult rather than a viable political party.
We've actually said that on this podcast. Chuck and I have said that the Democratic Party has become a religion, and when you're talking about the Democratic Party, the last 4 Democratic Party platforms that were put together spelled out that they wanted Jerusalem recognized as the capital of Israel. Now that was right in 4 written platforms to the Democratic Party. And then what was it, last June or July, a 90-0 vote in the Senate to confirm that very statement from years back, voted on by all the Democrats. Now Donald Trump steps up and says, well, let's put the embassy in Jerusalem. We've been saying this for 23 years. So, okay, we should follow up on our word. We should do what we're supposed to be doing. Does it? And now you've got Feinstein coming out saying that Hamas ought to be involved in picking this. You've got Bernie Sanders, saying that this is going to unravel peace talks. They're not even willing to follow their own platform anymore. I mean, are you seeing that same thing, that they'll throw their own values away in order to disagree with this president?
Yes, absolutely. And, I think that I think the thing that really scares them is what's happening right now with Kanye West and some other black people who are saying, I'm not a conservative necessarily, but it's obvious that the media is lying to me and the president is telling the truth. And so at the very least, I'm going to give the president a chance. And, I think the media is they're not doing themselves any favors. Nobody watches CNN and thinks, oh, this is a great thing. This is really helping the Democrats. It's terrible. It's tearing people apart. And people realize that all that division is coming from the Democrats. And when George Bush said that he wanted to run a kinder and gentler Republican Party, and here's the thing, Donald Trump has actually done it. Donald Trump's Republican Party is kinder and gentler. It's more open. It's more embraceful of different points of view. It's Christian. It's rooted in evangelical values. I mean, this really is a kinder, gentler Republican Party, and it's a whole lot more attractive than the nasty, corrupt, disgusting Democrats.
I don't disagree with that. I will say this, that Donald Trump has done us a big favor. He's done the country a big favor. He has unmasked, whether he meant to or not, the entire Democrat Party. It's difficult because it's almost like talking about the DOJ or the FBI. You have to be very careful to delineate against the leadership and the people who are doing the work. I don't think that everybody in the CIA obviously is bad or the FBI is bad. I think leadership is bad. And unfortunately, they represent these departments. But the Democrats, the leadership in the Democrat Party has been progressive. And I challenge people who don't know what that means to please look it up and figure out what progressivism is. It's right next to fascism and communism. It's just a link to it. It's socialism for sure. It's statism, absolutely. So when you have the Democrats unmasked after 100 years of trying to go for this and be this, and finally be completely unmasked and run Bernie Sanders, who's a Democrat socialist, which doesn't mean anything. He's still a socialist.
Yeah, that's my example of being a gourmet, cannibal.
Yeah,
You're still a cannibal.
It's ridiculous. He's still a socialist, and that's what he is. And we've educated all these kids to accept it and accept Marx and have the heroes of Che Guevara and Mao Zedong and all this kind of stuff. I mean, they have prepped this nation for this for a long, long time. And Trump comes along and pulls the mask right off, and they are so desperate that they've revealed who they really are. That is a great accomplishment for the American people, if for no other reason.
The Singapore summit was a very big, monumental moment of 2018, and Bart McQuaw was guest talking about President Trump's performance during the Singapore summit. Bart explains how President Trump has become the diplomat and put all the negotiations out in the open. Bart explains how a typical meeting between the president and foreign governments are decided well before the meeting ever happens, and it's really more of a media event. But Donald Trump has changed the game.
How do you think Trump did?
I think he did great. What we're seeing here, this goes to the post-Singapore analysis, and that is most presidential summit diplomacy for the last 70 years, it's been like a Blue Apron meal or a TV chef cooking a meal. Everything is pre-cut, pre-measured. It's all the work is done. The president comes in like a celebrity chef and says, now I'm going to put this in this bowl and this in that bowl and mix it up and put it in the oven, and presto, it's all done and it's magic, and he takes all the credit.
So it's a ceremony.
It's a ceremony. And everything is done and agreed upon beforehand. President Nixon said no president should ever attend a summit unless he knows what's already going to happen on the other side. And President Trump has upended that. And he's gone back.
Unconventional. He didn't. It was a surprise.
He upended everything.
It was a surprise to most people in the State Department, the Pentagon, that he was even going to Singapore.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Because he is going back to the pre-Truman form of presidential diplomacy, where the president is the diplomat.
Well, isn't that why we hired him?
That's why we hired him. That's exactly why we hired him. And he's saying, no, I'm the negotiator. I'm the guy. I come in. And if you want to stick with the chef analogy, what we saw in Singapore was he shot the deer, he slaughtered it, he field dressed it, he butchered it, and then he took out the cutlet that he's going to use for the meal. He's doing this all in front of people. And, the think tank scholars are going nuts because they don't like this. What? Go ahead.
The experts that we all depend on, who aren't necessarily experts at all.
Well, Bart, when we look at how diplomacy works, now you've spent a lot of your life working in foreign services, right?
Yes, I have.
And you worked for President Bush.
I did.
Bush 43.
I did. I was a career diplomat under Reagan, Bush 41, and Clinton, and then I became a senior official under Bush 43.
So you worked for the State Department?
Yes, I did.
Okay, boy, if I got goody, I can drill down.
Right.
Go ahead, Mark.
So when we look at these typical things, when we look at how a president normally handles such an event, people like yourself, people from the State Department, and probably lots of people would have been meeting with lots of counterparts like yourself from the other side for weeks or months. And all this negotiation would have been going on, including, and correct me if I'm wrong, including trading barbs and what I will take and what I won't take and what's going to trigger this and trigger that. Is that a fair assumption? But it's hidden from the public?
Yes, that's absolutely accurate. And what we would be looking for in those months leading up under a more traditional president would be what we always called deliverables. We'd be meeting with counterparts at the deputy assistant secretary level and above, and saying, what are the deliverables that the two principals can agree upon when they finally meet? And Trump came and said, I'll decide what the deliverables are. And we also would have been conducting what we call public diplomacy, which includes the trading of barbs or public statements. And it's a way of shaping the expectations of the other side. It's like a couple of coaches, alternating between trash talking the other team or saying the team they're about to play is the best team in the league except for their own, and they're just happy to be on the field with them and talking them up. Whatever makes it more helpful.
But normally it wouldn't be the president trading the barbs, right? It would be surrogates trading the barbs.
It'd be surrogates. It'd be the White House spokesman, State Department spokesman, an assistant secretary of state, an unnamed senior official. But so the president is taking charge of all of this personally.
Let's boil this down, Bart. Really, to boil it down is the State Department, the diplomats, the negotiators, so to speak, who are the professional negotiators, go in and negotiate everything first and then present a paper and a briefing to the president on this is what they will do, this is what they won't do, this is what we found, this is the attitude behind it, this is what you have to be careful of, this is how you got to proceed, and it's all done for you. So,
exactly.
So now you get a guy in office like Trump who is a master negotiator. He's done it all of his life. Most of our presidents haven't done that, if any of them. And he says, look, I know how to negotiate. You don't have to tell me how to do this. I can do it myself. And completely cuts out the State Department and everybody else.
We should be able to get rid of some payroll here, shouldn't we?
Yes, we should.
Yeah, and of course nobody on the left trusts him because they think he's a crook. But
So part of what's happening. So when we see the president, say fire and fury, little rocket man, some of that stuff under other presidents probably took place, but it probably wasn't by the president on Twitter.
Another terrible tragedy that was exposed by Blunt Force Truth and Mark and Chuck during 2018 was human smuggling. Jason Piccolo was guest. Jason talked about the truth about human smuggling and how everything that is smuggled across the border has a price on it. Children are being smuggled across the border without their parents and are being released to unvetted sponsors when they are released by the U.S. government. Jason was the whistleblower that exposed the Obama administration for putting the kids in danger.
Now, during that time, the White House Security Council stood up this human smuggling cell just to curb the flow of unaccompanied alien children and to stop smugglers from to try to block these corridors coming in from South America.
I don't think people understand exactly what you're talking about right there. I really don't think they have their head around people on the other side of the border smuggling people in and taking advantage of them, the human trafficking. What exactly is that? Put that in perspective for us.
Now, Chuck, look at it this way. Everything that comes across the border has a price on it. If a smuggler wants to smuggle a penny to make a 0.5 cent profit, he's going to do it. Now, children and everybody else that comes across the border, they're a commodity. Now, every year, a smuggler will take, let's say they're taking 80, 90,000 people across the border. That's a $5,000 a head. I call it almost like a bounty. They're going to make $5,000 per person to come across the border. That's $1 billion a year almost.
Where do these capitalism is doing well then in Mexico, Chuck?
What?
I said capitalism is obviously doing well in Mexico.
Another question is, how do these people we see riding on the top of trains and everything else, where do they get $5,000 per person?
Exactly. And that's one of the concerns I always had, is because when I blew the whistle, it was on unaccompanied alien children. Now they're coming across, you got a kid 2-3 years old, a baby. How do they know where to go? What are they going to put a post-it note on them and say, hey, you're going to go to 123 Main Street?
Why are these people sending these kids over, Jason? Why send kids over without their parents? What's the purpose?
There is no purpose. I mean, granted, the parents may be here, but are you going to smuggle your baby, your 5-year-old, your 6-year-old across the border that they might end up in your hands? How do you know where they are?
So these are people who, so just so we get the context of this. So I'm a Mexican citizen. I have left Mexico and smuggled my way into America. I'm now paying somebody to bring my kid to me. Is that what's going on?
That's essentially what it was like back then. But now, one thing I discovered when I was there was that adults were getting paired with children. They weren't even part of the same family, but they were given fraud documents, i.e. fraudulent passports, to marry up an adult with a child to get them through the border. Because the border was so, at the time, throughout 2015, 16, 14 too, what would happen is if you entered and you claimed yourself as part of a family unit, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get it released. So that's what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now that we have it in perspective that this has been going on since Clinton, that the separation of children from the parents, that kind of stuff, that's been going on for a long time too, hasn't it?
Yeah. And the thing is, one of the reasons I blew the whistle is because they were releasing kids to what I considered unvetted sponsors. So let me explain how the process.
How would you describe these unvetted sponsors?
Okay,
it's a very nice term for smuggler.
Yeah, don't use government terms on me.
No.
It's okay to say scumbag on this show if you want to use this.
Well, you know what? If you're going to smuggle a kid, you're going to smuggle anybody, you're a scumbag. Because it's not just smuggling, it's trafficking. And there's a little difference. Let's backtrack how the process works. You know, a kid hops on a train, a parent or someone facilitates them getting smuggled from South America. They come up through the Southwest corridor, through Central America, into Mexico, up to the border, and then what they would do is they would just come to the border and, hey, we'd pick them up. Now, Border Patrol would pick them up at the border if they're outside of a port of entry, and then if they come into a port of entry, Customs and Border Protection would. Now, what happens is enforcement and removal operations is in charge of removing aliens and enforcing the laws. So what they would do is they would get custody of the child next. I mean, they would take charge of it. And then
once they step foot on American soil, the game is on, right?
Yes. And then what happens is at that point, from ICE, they're given over to Health and Human Services. Now, Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, all these different acronyms, ORR, would then take the child and give it to a contracted facility. Now, back then, the contracted facility would then release them to a sponsor. And what I found out was the contracted facilities were not doing enough vetting. Now, what President Trump did about a few weeks ago is they took some of my suggestions and they're starting to vet these sponsors, i.e. taking fingerprints, some sort of biometrics, to try to, determine, one, if they're a criminal, and try to see if there's any record in the system.
Oh, so what's happening now, and these were with your recommendations, but what's happening now under President Trump is we're trying to see that these children are not placed in danger.
Yes, and you got to look at it this way.
It's horrible.
Well, the other thing is, I'm not really cognizant on all the children getting torn from their parents. I just know my experience. But the thing is, if you have a legitimate asylum or refugee claim, I believe there's 9 consulate offices in Mexico. Present yourself there. If you can't get into one of those consulates, I can imagine how many ports of entry we have in the United States coming in from Mexico. Go up to the port of entry. What's happening now is you have these family units coming across the porous border. And that's where one of the things I was talking about, having a wall, would actually help. It's actually helping to protect. Yeah.
We're led to believe that President Trump is down there himself, ripping babies from their mother's bosom while they're breastfeeding. That's literally what's being presented. And that kids are in cages. Did you ever see kids in cages?
No, I didn't. But when I blew the whistle, there was a couple newspaper articles. but that's it. You know, I could Google whistleblower 2015 and you get a couple Obama administration releasing kids to criminals. That's it.
Well, I've seen kids in cages during 2014 when Obama was president. They had all kinds of pictures of kids in cages, and that's what they used to blame Trump.
A.W.R. Hawkins, a gun expert, continues the 2018 Best of Blunt Force Truth. In this episode, he explains why the left is over worrying about 3D printed guns not having serial numbers, and that it won't stop criminals if they do have serial numbers. AWR explains why guns have serial numbers and how the government uses it. Chuck and Mark also discuss with AWR Hawkins why the left passes over the Second Amendment when they are talking about guns. They conclude that the left villainizes guns because they really don't know much about guns and they are really uninformed about real gun statistics. Let's check out this clip with AWR Hawkins, Mark Young, and Chuck Woolery.
CNC, I used one of the Defense Distributed Ghost Gunners, the Ghost Gunner 2. And the Ghost Gunner 2, you can use that to finish a 1911, an AR-15, or an AR-10.
So you're just an amateur gunsmith, basically.
Well, amateur would be the right word, Chuck.
Well, but I mean, you know, your guy makes like a guy makes furniture in his basement, or maybe not your basement, but wherever it is. You're just doing it for yourself instead of running out and buying a product.
So now, let me give you their side, though. Let me push back on you. I'm going to play their side for a minute. So don't think that I'm a crazy progressive.
Right.
Your gun has no serial number on it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, that's wrong.
That's exactly right. Well, I mean, I don't know.
Are you saying it's untraceable?
Yeah, it's untraceable. I'm supposed to feel I know some degree of shame or regret over that, but I don't, because the gun is my gun and it's going to be right here in my house. The law allows me to make this gun as long as I don't sell it. So there are laws that hedge in what I can do with this firearm.
What if it's stolen? What do you do then?
I don't know. I guess you call police. Just like, you know, the thing is, if a criminal, people don't understand this. I know you guys do, but if a criminal steals a gun, odds are he or she is going to take a file and work the serial number off the gun anyway, as soon as they get it. So, I mean, this idea that, wow, the gun doesn't have a serial number. Well, many of the guns the police confiscate from criminals don't have serial numbers. So
let me ask you a question that's an obvious question. Why does any gun have a serial number?
Well,
and when did it start? Do you know when it started? When we started?
I don't know when it started, but I can tell you why. They have serial numbers so that the government can, to some degree, compile a database. I know I sound like a conspiracy theorist when I say that, but I'm just being honest.
So this is a piece of legislation that passed for gun makers like Winchester, Remington,
right,
so that the government can keep track of the guns that they manufacture.
Right. I would think that. I would assume that. I can't say with authority, Chuck, because I haven't investigated that fully.
It's kind of an interesting question, though, isn't it?
It is an interesting question. It's worth pursuing, and I will pursue it. But I know the government uses those serial numbers to create databases. They tell us they don't, but the ATF keeps their Form 4473, which is the background check form. And you'll notice let's say when a mass shooting occurs, usually within 24 to 36 hours, they can tell us where that gun was purchased, who purchased that gun, so on and so forth. So a database is kept based on serial numbers.
Mm-hmm. So, Chuck, I can answer the question for you. Guns started having serial numbers in 1968.
Oh, well, that's the Gun Control Act.
Correct. Right. Gun Control Act.
That's recent.
Right.
That's recent history. So everything up to 1968 did not have a serial number on it?
Well, if it did, it was voluntary.
Yes. Right. It could have had a manufacturer's number because manufacturers oftentimes want to track things from a warranty standpoint.
Mm-hmm. So the fear of the average uninformed citizen is that every gun that is made, every gun that is purchased, every gun that is had by anybody is a threat to everybody, and that we really shouldn't own guns because we really don't need them.
Right.
So when it comes to the Second Amendment, did they just completely miss that and they don't understand it, or they're totally uninformed, or because they're not uninformed, they know about it, they've read it, they know what it says, So what's the big to-do over all this thing with guns? I mean, the fact that Chicago's got a death about every 5 seconds and all that, that's one thing. But that hasn't got anything to do with people who are responsible gun owners. That's with criminals. I was watching a movie the other night, and a guy who's not in a police force or anything else is running around Paris, and there are 15 guys out there with automatic weapons, and he doesn't have a gun. And somebody said, well, did you bring a gun? He said, well, no, you can't carry a gun here. And he said, well, we got to get a gun. If we don't have a gun, how are we going to defend ourselves?
Right.
So he finally broke down and got a gun and figured out how to load it in about 15 minutes. I mean, it was hysterical. And this is a movie,
Right.
What were you watching? Death Wish or something?
So I watch stupid movies.
I think there's so much misinformation, Chuck. The answer
isn't that what the progressive Democrats just thrive on?
That's what they thrive on. I taught at the university for a while, and I had to get out of there. It drove me nuts because you have people who are freshmen and sophomore in college who don't understand even the most fundamentals about the Constitution, the Founding Fathers. I'll never forget, I asked somebody who was the president of the Confederacy during the Civil War. This is just in a survey course. Somebody named Jimmy Carter. And I knew right then.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, he's old enough to have been there. I knew I was in the wrong profession, but
he came from the right area. Come on, he had the right real estate.
It was either him or Jeff Sessions. I know it was one of them. Yeah.
But the thing is, they have dumbed us down to such a degree. We have. If you look at Gary Kleck's work, criminologist at Florida State University, we have on a minimum 760,000 defensive gun uses a year. If you use, I'm not good at math, but if you divide that by 365, that means there are 2,082 roughly defensive gun uses a day in this country. That blows people's mind, but most people don't understand how big this nation is. I think you can set France inside of the state of Texas.
Yeah, and that's it.
So we have so many proper gun uses a day. Not one of them are reported. At Breitbart, we report them, but in the establishment media, they suppress this news. So no one knows.
I got to give it to Glenn Beck, too. Glenn Beck does that as well.
Yeah, he does, too. I'm not trying to discredit anybody.
No, I know that, but they're just what you're saying is there are so few places that even recognize.
Right.
Well, there's another thing, too, and that is that the FBI uniform crime reports, the uniform crime statistics don't report crimes prevented. They only report crimes that have happened.
Right.
So when you look at databases and you look at annual stats, they're only going to show you crimes.
Right. But, Mark, if you look at those, the thing, and I try to cover those every year when they come out. Last year, they showed that over 4 times as many people were stabbed to death as were shot with a rifle of any kind. So even if you read those reports, if you read them right, you understand, wait, guns are not the big enemy here. People are the big enemy, and they use whatever tool they have.
Is there anybody better than Dinesh D'Souza? No, seriously, is there? I mean, Chuck Woolery and Mark Young, probably, but other than that, is there anybody better than Dinesh D'Souza? Well, Dinesh was on an episode of Blunt Force Truth this year, 2018, and he explains how he looks at the Mueller investigation and the guilty pleas with Cohen through his own experiences with these investigations. Dinesh explains how President Trump is being targeted by deep state to find a crime that nothing he has done voids his presidency. So they get into that. Mark and Chuck explain how every American breaks federal law daily. They'll get into that. And what have you done to break the law? I'm Rusty Humphries. Let's listen to Dinesh D'Souza with Mark Young and Chuck Woolery on Blunt Force Truth 2018 Rewind.
There are not facts in the world if they don't cover it, and they don't cover most anything. It's I was watching last night Anderson Cooper debating what's his name Dershowitz on the law.
Come on, Anderson Cooper debated
Honestly,
Alan Dershowitz.
It was just hysterical. I'm thinking
that's not a debate. Really? That's a beating.
And then Tobin was, I guess, once a student of Dershowitz, and he was on the panel. There were 3 of them, and Tobin kept saying, "Can I talk? Can I talk? Can I get in here?" I was just laughing. I could hysterically, but probably funny to me, not so funny to people who watch CNN.
So Dinesh, on this Alan Dershowitz thing, we see what's going on with this Cohen deal. And to expand on that, I'm going to guess and say you were seeing Alan Dershowitz, who's basically saying the president has no risk here. There's nothing. There's no here.
Right. That's what I was.
Dinesh, what do you think about this?
Well, I mean, I look at these developments through the prism of my own
experience.
My own experience.
Yes.
And so when I hear things like Cohen took a plea, right away my antenna goes up because I realize how these things come about. In my own case, for example, the government comes to me. This is the Obama Justice Department operating through this sort of local guy, Preet Bharara. So they come up to me and they say, did you exceed the campaign finance law? In effect, I say, well, yeah, I did. And I should get the same penance that goes to anybody else who did the same thing. And then they go, oh, no, that's not what we have in mind at all. We actually want to dispatch you to prison. But I noticed that if you don't plead to this, we will charge you with mail fraud. And I say, mail fraud? And they go, well, you put the check in the mail. And then they say, we're going to charge you with bank fraud. And I say, bank fraud? They go, yeah, because you took your own money out of your bank account. And then I begin to realize, okay, I kind of see what's going on here. You're taking what I did, you're redescribing it 7 or 8 different ways. You're trying to attach a charge to each one of those. You now want me to look at an accretion of charges, multiple charges that would send me away to prison for years. If I were convicted, destroying my career, destroying my relationship with my family. And so you're bludgeoning me into accepting guilt on this one count. And the moment I do, you'll jump up and down and say, see, the guy admitted to it. He voluntarily said he did it. Whereas you know full well, and everyone who's not born yesterday knows full well, you bludgeoned me to the ground to accept this. So all of this is the essential background to understanding what's happening in this case.
Well, with Cohen, I mean, he pled guilty to, I guess, what was it, financial indiscretion or something about campaign finances. It's true that normally they treat this every single administration that runs afoul of this law. And the Obama administration, I think, were fined something like $380,000 at one time, which was a very large fine for that. But it's really treated as, in Dershowitz's own words, who is a liberal professor and constitutional lawyer, a traffic. It's a misdemeanor. It's no big deal. But it's a misdemeanor for the left. It's a hanging offense for the right.
And that gets to the heart of the matter, because let's look at this. I mean, certainly if Trump paid out of his own money, then legally there's no issue there at all.
But they consider that, the way unless I've got this wrong, since he financed his own campaign, they consider that campaign finances, which is ludicrous, of course.
Well, except I think that actually benefits Trump, because what it means is that even if the campaign paid, Trump can say, it was my money.
Right.
In other words, I wasn't using other people's dollars to do this, whether the dollar came out of my pocket or whether it came out of my pocket as given to the campaign. At the most, what you have is a failure of the campaign to disclose, which is actually a technical violation by the campaign. This, as you say, happens all the time and is usually treated with some sort of a fine to the campaign, or the campaign has to make some sort of admission. It in no way invalidates Trump's election or his presidency. Remember how far all of this is, how far afield it is from Russia collusion. Part of what I think distresses me about the whole case is not whether Manafort did it or Cohen did it. Maybe they did all the things they're accused of. But a legitimate justice system does not find the man and then go in search of the crime. A legitimate justice system starts with the crime and then begins to look for who did it. But in this case, that's clearly not the case. Everyone knows if Manafort and Cohen had no dealings with Trump, neither of them would be facing any charges right now. So what really happens is that Mueller identifies the target and then goes to look to see what they did wrong. Now that, I think every reasonable American knows that if you're targeted, whoever you are, and the government says, okay, let's start looking at his bank records, let's start looking at his tax returns, let's see what we can get him on, you're going to be able to find something.
And that's where we should be afraid, because when, like what happened to you or with Manafort, and I'm not for a moment saying Manafort's a good guy. It looks like Manafort's got some shaky stuff in his past. I'm not defending Manafort, but the reality is every one of us, all three of us on this show right now, probably violated God knows how many federal laws just getting to this show today.
I have a tendency to do something that I probably shouldn't admit. But I have cushions on my outdoor furniture, and I have a mattress.
Oh,
on my bed.
You've tore the labels.
I will take scissors immediately and cut off all of those labels. And I'm warned that it's against the law to do that. And I don't save them.
Well, you know, there was a very important book published a few years ago by a civil rights attorney, I believe Harvey Silvergate, called 3 Felonies a Day. And the point of this book is that our federal statutes have become like an accordion. They're huge, they're expanding, they expand and contract at prosecutors' discretion. The point is you can find any American guilty of 3 felonies if you really look hard enough. You go to a medical doctor and you go, gee, you administered this painkiller, we don't think it was appropriate, we're going to charge you with illegal administration of pain medicine. You go to an attorney, you say, you made a false statement in this particular brief, we're going to charge you with lying to a federal official. In California, I guess they can get you for drinking with a straw.
Right.
But the point here is that everyone is vulnerable, and so we should be a little scared of this kind of justice system operating in this political and politicized way.
That's the point. We should be, as citizens, we should be. We're getting people's eyes looking. Cohen did this, Manafort did that, and where we're not getting people to pay attention is, my God, they can go after anybody. The justice system turned after a bona fide Republican candidate for president. If they can go after a billionaire running for president, what hope do I have if they decide they want me?
Well, that wraps up our 2019 Blunt Force Truth retrospective. Mark Young and Chuck Woolery wanted me to thank you so much for listening in 2018, and we pray that you'll continue to join us and prosper in 2019. We hope you enjoyed these clips as much as we did. We look forward to seeing you in 2019. May God bless you, and may God bless America. My name is Rusty Humphreys. Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of Mark Young and Chuck Woolery, have a great 2019 with Blunt Force Truth.